All right, everybody, welcome to the second episode of the Basement Takes podcast. My name is Austin, and I'm joined here today by a good friend of mine and a legendary viral Minecraft animation YouTuber, Mr. Stefan. How are you doing today, sir?
Hello, Austin. I'm doing okay. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Um, so today we have a little bit of a different episode, not really talking about a specific genre of game per se. Today we're going to be taking a look at kind of the state of AAA gaming as a whole, um, and kind of where it's at, the effect of like microtransactions and kind of corporate greed coming in and taking over and turning gaming in from what used to be a semi kind of niche market, which I mean, not a lot of people were a part of, to this giant titan of money generation and these super mega corporations that it is today. So yeah, we're just gonna kind of be sharing our thoughts. I know our spending habits when it comes to games are a little bit different. I tend to be more on the side of buying games pretty much full price when they come out. Um, Most of the time, it's games that I've been following for a while. Um, Games that I've been excited for, like generated hype for me. Um, but for you, on the other hand, from the time that I've known you for a long ass time, and you are kind of the opposite on that.
Yeah,
And I've noticed throughout the years, just like you know, getting games and kind of getting into like new things and kind of trying new games. Um, Kind of seems to be you kind of seem to be a little bit more hesitant when it comes to that stuff. And I think, do you think, in your eyes, do you think it has to do with like the hype kind of like you're scared the hype is going to be unwarranted and it's going to kill the game for you? Or why
yeah.
don't you go ahead and explain that?
If I'm being honest, I really can't remember the last time I paid full price for a game. Um, but I do remember also getting burned in the past. So I guess you're right in that. I suppose I'm typically more cautious and maybe a little more cynical about new releases, especially when they want to charge $60, sometimes even
Yeah.
more for special editions. But yeah, I definitely do think I err on the side of caution in terms of AAA releases.
Yeah, I think for the most part that is not a very uncommon mindset to be in. I think especially nowadays, even more so than back in the day. I think more people are on your side, where they are becoming very hyper aware of the dangers of the hype train and jumping on hype, early on. And then, I mean, you need to only look at the past, what, 5 years of gaming, and you can see that, I mean, you can count on one hand, maybe even one finger, the amount of games that have come out and that have actually delivered on the
Yeah,
promises that they've promised, during the whole hype cycle. I mean, you
yeah.
look
There are
at,
too many examples to list
yeah,
of AAA releases that just utterly flopped. I mean, just a
and
few
just
that
like,
come to mind. Remember No Man's Sky when that first came out, Assassin's
yeah,
Creed Unity, Ghost Recon Wildlands. There's just too many to list.
yeah. I mean, you look at like, again, like Fallout 76 and like Anthem
Oh
and
God, yeah.
like all of these games that are made by very, very talented, unfairly talented studios. And it just seems like over the, again, probably I'd probably say like the past 5 years or so, people are starting to, and people have always been getting mad at these situations, don't get me wrong. I mean, or else we wouldn't be talking about those games in particular here today. But I feel like people now are becoming more cynical and becoming more, their standards are becoming a lot higher as a result of all of these failed promises. um, and if you look at kind of where we are today, in August, we're kind of in a weird spot, due to the current situation in the climate with coronavirus. And you look at kind of the drought in gaming in general that we've been in for a little while. And you look at games like Fall Guys that have just come out. Not really like a AAA game, but people are legitimately, I think, latching on to anything new that they can find and um, playing the shit out of it. I mean, Fall Guys has become probably one of the most popular games of the past 2 months. more than anything that's out right now. And if you look at the climate, I mean, we have like stuff on the horizon. Like, of course, Cyberpunk 2077 is due a couple months from now, and you have big
Assuming it doesn't
games.
get delayed again, which honestly is a
Yeah,
possibility.
yeah, it's never off the table for sure, especially now where I mean, another great example is Halo Infinite, a game
Hmm.
that is another giant AAA company. Microsoft Studios has literally infinite money, and this whole kind of culture of just, I guess, like going to like the main theme of what we're kind of going to be talking about here is just like the culture of mediocrity, and all of these companies. Cyberpunk is kind of not a good example for a mediocre game. I mean, it's considered before it's even released. It's gonna people are predicting it's gonna break so many records. But if you look at games like like Cyberpunk, sorry, look at games like Halo Infinite. Whenever they showed the trailer, everyone was kind of like, okay, like
Yeah,
I
it did not
mean,
generate the fire that 343 was hoping for.
it's definitely a Halo game for sure. It's definitely, I mean, there's Master Chief, but it's just like you think about what's going on through these like development studios and these studio heads, what's going through their heads on these like marketing meetings and these PR meetings where they are giving the green light to just these absolutely kind of depressing game trailers, and they are making all these promises about the game's going to be released now, the game's going to be released, and there's like, oh, we're going to delay it, and it's like, oh, it's because of COVID. It's like, no, I think it's because you thought what you were doing was right, and then the community that you released it to doesn't see through that bullshit anymore, and they're like, hey, you need to change your game. And so all these companies are realizing that they're not really going to be able to get away with this shit anymore, with just feeding absolute like stale stuff to the community and expecting it to fly. You know what I mean?
Yeah, there seems to be the classic case of the management tug of war in a lot of these big AAA studios because you have these high level executives that are the ones calling the shots, yet simultaneously know very little about the industry, and they
Yeah.
are the ones who are pressuring the actual developers and the team making the game to hit these deadlines when again they have no clue what kind of work is involved and what kind of issues that the teams are facing. So all they have to work with are dates that they either make or don't make. And there seems to be a paradigm shift, like you mentioned, in the past 5, 6 years when the teams would let the executives get away with this stuff and they would release the game on time, yet it would be completely busted and broken. And clearly, these guys must have learned a couple lessons, or their pocketbooks must be hurting because now they're having to push these games back. Because what I assume happens is that their schedules are all off now because their original estimations of how long it takes to make a game are wrong because their schedule was based off of broken games and not fully functional, ready to release titles.
Yeah, and I think you made a really good point about these executives and these gaming companies, and um, like when you go back, even like 10 years ago, you really are looking at a system where games are being made by gamers, and games are being made by people who grew up playing games. And you look at like the kind of like the golden age of Bethesda, and I watched kind of like a documentary on like the making of Oblivion recently, and you look at a young twinkle-eyed Todd Howard, and he's talking about he grew up playing games, and all of his friends used to think that games were just made in a basement, with six guys, but in reality, it's 3 years and 65 people in a studio, and everybody there is on the same page, and they are making a game because they want it to be the best it can possibly be, and they're not making it to make it be game of the year. Obviously that's a great goal to have, but you look at back then, these game companies are making these games because it's a what they think people will like to play, and it's what they would want to play at the end of the day as well.
Hmm.
And I
Yeah,
think a
absolutely.
lot a lot of the climate nowadays is a lot of these executives are business majors, and they are you know uh, so like they know how to engineer the social kind of PR side of it to generate this hype
Yeah,
into.
they know how to market.
Yeah, exactly. And you look at I think Blizzard is a really good example of a company that makes generates a lot of really good hype for their games. But then when the game comes out, it's just kind of a stinking poo poo in the road, and it's just kind of
Yeah,
like they make awesome trailers and they make awesome like awesome hype. They generate all this hype, and the game comes out, it's just kind of like wah. And just
yeah,
like
I
it's like
agree.
okay, great, on to the next thing.
And
And
it's made all the more damning by the fact that Blizzard does have some serious talent in their employ. I mean, you
yeah,
look at, I mean, you just take one look at Overwatch, and I mean, I guess WoW to a certain extent. And the artists are just impeccable. They're fantastic at their job. And if I'm being honest, I do think they deserve better, at least on the management end, because like you said, too much effort is put into marketing a product versus making an actual video game that people can enjoy.
yeah. And I think that's why you see, especially nowadays, kind of as we're going forward into like this next generation of games and this kind of new wave of what the like the standard's going to be, you're seeing a lot of Blizzard employees leaving, and you're seeing a lot of heads of Activision kind of speaking up, and you're seeing a lot of people internally that share our same mindset talking about all these issues. And you see like the head of I don't remember what company was it, but there was a huge game coming recently that had a bunch of people speak. Oh, I think it was Ubisoft. It was Ubisoft that had a bunch
Mm.
of people internally speaking up about basically why every single Ubisoft game has been the same over the past 8 years is because they had a dude there that the only thing that he wanted to do was make games that he knew would sell well,
Yeah,
and he only followed a system that would work and not a system that was fun.
it's like
So
they're
they had
making the new version of Microsoft PowerPoint instead of, a
yeah,
new Assassin's Creed.
exactly. And there's a really kind of sad example where there was this game called like it was like Project Avalon, I think it was called, and it was supposed to be this huge, massive like single player RPG that Ubisoft was working on that was set in like an alternate kind of like King Arthur era. And the head of the studio literally said, um, the only way that I will greenlight this game is if it's better than Tolkien. Like
Hmm.
to be better, to put that kind of standard on a team, to be better than the literal founder of modern day fantasy, that just kind of tells you the type of leadership that they had for a
Yeah,
while,
that's
where
very unfair for the developers.
yeah, they want, and the game was like a year in development or something, I don't know the exact details, but like the developers want to make these amazing, deep, awesome games that everybody wants because they are like us. They get into
Yeah,
game development because they want to make good games, but they have
yeah.
these corporate guys over them that are that all they know is business and money making. And you look at EA and you look at all these companies that are making these kind of like these games as a service systems, and they're putting in their microtransactions and they're um, doing all this like money stuff kind of under the scenes. You look at like
Hmm.
FIFA Ultimate Team is like the highest selling, most money making system in the world,
It's
like
a little
in
sad,
gaming
isn't it?
history.
It's a little disheartening.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little disheartening that FIFA, I mean, it's not even like really like an amazing game, but you look at this system that all it is selling you booster packs, and it's generating billions of dollars, and it's not,
Yeah,
it's so soulless. I mean, it's not, there's nothing there. And all these, giant corporate heads, they see this system and they see that it works. And I think that's kind of where all of this comes from, is they're seeing all of these very greedy kind of soulless systems that they're putting in their games. And the sad part is that it's working.
yeah. And so for the overall issue of the money-making game versus the good game, I suppose I'm a little torn on it because Hollywood shows very much the same patterns. You have
Yeah,
these studios that will produce 3 or 4 just garbage movies every year. Most of them around summer. These movies that are designed to make money in the box office, and that's it. That's your Jurassic World and your Dwayne the Rock Johnson skyscraper. Those type of movies
yeah,
that are just garbage, yet they sell. And I suppose I'm torn because it's those movies that allow these companies to make money that they could use to invest in risks. And that's where the really good movies come out. When Warner Brothers, was it Warner Brothers? Oh, I forget. Um when Lord of the Rings was made in the late 90s, that was a huge risk obviously because it was one of the most
yeah,
expensive movie series to make. especially at the time, for an
It was
intellectual
New Line
property that
Cinema.
not too many people were familiar with. But it
Yeah,
was that risk that seriously paid off, and as a result, we have one of the greatest trilogies of all time.
yeah,
And so I have no problem with companies pumping out a FIFA every year as long as they dedicate a portion of their income to the actual art, moving the video games industry forward. But they seem to be really, really scared to do that, and I don't know why. Because, like you said, they have so much money. These FIFA games and these games as a profit I guess mechanism. They make so much money that they could really afford to take some risks, but they don't.
yeah. I mean, you kind of hit the nail right on the head. I mean, it's like I think Hollywood, especially modern day Hollywood, is a very good example and kind of a good analogy to draw from. Where you look at like movies like the Avengers and um, kind of you look at the pattern of these huge Hollywood blockbuster franchises that have come out. Like you look at like Harry Potter and Twilight franchise, kind of to a certain extent, and these Lord of the Rings is guilty of it too, where they kind of figured out that if you take a story and you split it up over like 7 or 8 movies, you make a shit ton more money than if you just make one good movie that'll go
Yeah,
down in history as a good movie. And you look at like, the ending of Harry Potter and kind of the way that they split the last book up into 2 parts, and Deathly Hallows Part 1 and 2. And then you look at like the
The
Twilight
Hobbit.
franchise. Yeah, The Hobbit and the Twilight franchise did the same thing where they took, Breaking Dawn and they split it up into 2 parts. You look at The Hobbit
Yeah.
where they took a 150-page book and made it into three 2.5 hour long movies. It's just
Yeah.
like to a certain point, it's like if they added depth and emotion and power to the movies, like if it added, like for Harry Potter, I think it's considered okay. Like I think the two parts are kind of considered to be good because the book is so long that they kind of needed to split it up into two
Harry
movies, or
Potter
else they would
books are
just
quite dense. I agree with you on that
yeah.
one.
And so they would have to kind of make 2 movies just so they could fit everything in there. But you look at like The Hobbit, and it's like the book is a children's movie. I mean, it's a
Yeah.
children's book. It was written as a
Yeah.
children's book, like a bedtime story. It doesn't need 3 movies. And you
No,
look
one would
at
have been perfectly fine, and honestly, I think it would have been better received because you wouldn't have to go through the same level of production hell that the three movies went through. I'm not sure if you're familiar with kind of the story of the making of The Hobbit, but I
yeah, I
guess long
think
story short, it was madness because they had to do so much in so little time, working with such little source material, and as a result, that's why the series. I mean, do you hear people talking about the Hobbit movies today? I don't. I think us
no
talking
every
about it is the first time I've even thought about it in the past 4 years.
yeah, um I think if and when people talk about it, it's always about what we're talking about now. It's like,
Yeah,
God,
how it pales in comparison to Lord of the Rings.
what a wasted potential.
Seriously.
And the Hobbit movies aren't necessarily like they're not necessarily bad films. They're just bad Lord of the Rings films. And
Yeah,
like
exactly.
the same thing could be said about the new Star Wars movies. Well, no, that's not a fair comparison because the Star Wars movies are just terrible movies overall. But the new ones that is kind of like the
Mhm.
sequel trilogy. But I feel like that's a
Yeah,
whole other
those
conversation in itself.
struggle. Those struggle for other reasons. Although from what I've heard, I think the ninth one, which I have not seen by the way, but from what my brother told me, the ninth one went through some production hell as well, and I suppose it shows. But I think one of the main symptoms for the I guess bad movie syndrome is just the fact that nobody talks about them. Because again, you have the Jurassic World that nobody talks about or thinks about years later, whereas Lord of the Rings, which are now almost I mean, think about it. Fellowship next year is going to be 20 years old. It's ridiculous.
Yeah,
But
it's
people still
insane.
talk about it. They're still just fantastic movies because you can tell they had heart and soul and they were a risk and it paid off because people cared about the IP. And I
Yeah,
feel like that's what a lot of companies are missing is that at the end of the day, the only guarantee for profit or for a successful game is a product well made. You can't cut corners on that. You can't take shortcuts. That seems to be the only way to guarantee success is to make something good.
yeah,
But
and
they still try and take shortcuts.
I think a perfect example of that, kind of tying it back into the gaming world, is you look at what is it, Ghost of Tsushima that just came out.
Hmm.
It was a game that everybody knew about, and everybody kind of was like, okay, like it's on their radar.
It
And the
was an
game came
underdog.
out, and it was just simply fantastic. Like I haven't played it. I don't own a PS4, but I've watched playthroughs. I've been on Twitter. I've
It
seen
looks great.
people's. Yeah, it looks great. It performs really well, even though it's on almost at this point a last generation console, which is the fact
Hmm.
that they were able to make the game artistically and stylistically look that way with that old of hardware is just is a testament to the care that went into it. And you look at the story and how powerful it is, and if you watch like playthroughs of it, I mean, it's like watching an old samurai movie. And you look at how it was received in Japan, and it was like absolutely blew the charts off of Japan. Like people weren't really expecting that either because it's a Western made samurai game, and it did so well in Japan that the actual I don't know where Tsushima is geographically in Japan, but that prefecture that it's a part of actually has ads for Ghost of Tsushima in its travel brochures, like as a selling
That's
point
awesome.
to go visit that prefecture. So you look at games like that, and then you look at games like The Last of Us, where you could argue that it was a good story, and that could be potentially very controversial if the
Yeah,
actual storyline was
asterisk.
good. Yeah, it was a good asterisk story. But you could tell that the development team cared a lot about the game they were making, and
Yeah,
the people that like The Last of Us 2 fucking love The Last of Us 2. And the people that hate it absolutely hate it. And
it's very polarizing. Yeah.
they have their own reasons, but you look at kind of like the the people that were making it and kind of like the way they were approaching the PR. It was kind of this whole like, we're making the game we want to. We don't really give a crap about what you guys want.
Exactly.
We're
Yeah.
making our game, and you
It
guys
was
can
the
like it if you
snooty
don't.
artist.
Yeah,
I don't
and they
think anyone
use
likes a snooty artist.
yeah, and they use the whole like we don't use the word fun here, and that's an official quote from Neil Druckmann. And like when you're making a game, you kind of got to use the word fun here and there. And from what
Yeah,
I've heard of people that have played, again, I don't have a PS4, so I can't play this game. But from what I've heard, I have firsthand accounts, and they say the combat's great. I mean, the combat's just like it was in The Last of Us, and the overall like gameplay is fine. But as far as
it
like the
does look
story,
incredible as well.
again, it looks incredible for last generation hardware, and that's very impressive, and that should be celebrated as well. And then you look at just kind of like the way that they handled the story. I mean, it's like it can either go one of two ways. You can have a company that is extremely open minded and they make a game with all of the community feedback in mind, or you can make your game and either you're taking a big risk, I think I should say, first of all, whenever you're making a game that you want to make rather than making a game that the public wants. And I feel like that's kind of what these like games like Ghost of Tsushima were doing with the risk factor, because
Hmm.
nobody really asked for a samurai game and nobody was really like expecting a samurai game after
It's also a
Sekiro.
period of history that is relatively unknown, especially to pop culture and your
Yeah,
everyday layman's knowledge about history. You don't exactly think of the Mongol invasion of Japan. You think of World War II and the Great Depression and stuff like that when you think of history, not necessarily that particular part. But in my opinion, that's what makes the more interesting stories is the one that you haven't thought about.
yeah, not many people I guess like historical samurais are cool, but that's not really a blockbuster selling point, Like it used to
Exactly,
be
yeah. They were
back
long
in
out of
like
fashion.
yeah, like it used to be kind of like the spaghetti westerns, right? Like spaghetti westerns and samurai movies used to be the fucking bomb. Like
Yeah,
they were the modern day Marvel. And you look at nowadays when you look at like what sells, it's always, you know, sci-fi big bang super high blockbuster explosion like you know
yeah.
like
Near
we
future type
yeah
warfare.
and we like
It's
to
always
use the
that.
term as kind of like an inside joke like the bing bing wahoo like
Exactly.
like the Mario noise like it's very like you look at like Overwatch, you look at Valorant, you look at games like Rogue Company that just came out. A lot of these
Hmm.
games that are like Fortnite, oh my god, is the perfect
Yeah,
example of
that's
this,
that's a perfect example.
where it's like it's flashing colors,
Sensory overload.
extremely simple, ease of entry, kind of just these games that are super cookie cutter, very easy. You go into the board meeting and they're like, this is what we're making. And everyone's like, oh yeah, of course that's going to work, right?
Hmm.
Um, and then you look at games like Ghost of Tsushima, where it's very slow, kind of. It's very historically accurate. There's no dragons and fire and giant explosions and all this stuff, but
Yeah, there's
it's very
nothing necessarily
powerful.
eye-catching other than just the atmosphere and the kind of
Yeah,
mood it
and
sets.
you look at how well it sells, and I feel like a lot of these game companies don't understand that. Like they
It
almost
gives
feel
me
like,
hope.
yeah, and they almost feel like I feel like they almost feel like, oh, well, they just got lucky. Like, oh,
Yeah.
they just struck the iron while it's hot. They just did, that's just business.
No,
They
they worked
just
hard and they deserve the success.
it's like
They came up with a unique idea.
drives
Um,
me crazy. I'm gonna finish my thought before I forget,
sure.
but it drives me crazy when you look at how fucking simple the algorithm is for making a good AAA game. You just make a game that that is it's hard to say that's just good because that's like, well, obviously,
Hmm.
but you just make a game and you pour your passion into it and you give it all you got, and if the players can see that and they can see that care, if you make a good game, people will buy it. It's like
Yeah,
the algorithm is so simple, but these giant companies, I'm kind of wrapping it up. These giant companies, I guess they just don't get that. They don't see that that is what makes money.
they don't
And
want to put in the work.
yeah, they're like, why would we make this super deep, epic game that put a lot of care and a lot of detail into, when we're wasting our time doing that when we can just put in a simple bingo machine and generate
FIFA.
eight quadrillion dollars in a
Yeah.
day. It's just like that's just it's so easy, but it's so diluted with this kind of corporate greed that it's just kind of shot down
Hmm.
before the guy can even finish his pitch.
Yeah. But one thing that I was thinking about a little while ago is that Ghost of Tsushima honestly reminds me a lot of Red Dead Redemption, both 1 and 2, because
Yeah.
it is set in a sort of overlooked part of history, the Mongol invasion of Japan versus the kind of the dying and taming of the Wild West. And it's kind of based loosely on this stereotype or this kind of cinema I guess cinema style of yore, right? Because cowboy movies were super super popular in the
Yeah.
60s and 70s, and so were samurai movies. There's the whole Seven Samurai that went on to inspire a lot of cowboy movies. They actually have a lot in common, the whole samurai versus the lone cowboy, the wanderer archetype, right?
Yeah.
But it's really interesting to kind of parallel the success between Red Dead 1 and 2 and Ghost of Tsushima, because like you said, they took a original idea and they slowed the pace down. They did not include any sort of high octane explosions. They focused more on the mood and the timbre, and they benefited from the success, which honestly it does give me hope, because both Red Dead 1 and 2 are a couple of my favorite games of all time. And I've not yet played Ghost of Tsushima, but based on the similarities with Red Dead 1 and 2, I do get the feeling I would really like it if I do play it. And I do hope to someday.
Yeah. I mean, it's very easy. I mean, the proof is in the pudding with Ghost of Tsushima. I mean, it sold well because it's a good game, and it's a good
Yeah.
game because the development studio wanted to make a good game, and it has no BS. And you look at like the way that they're handling the future and like the content that they're releasing. I don't know if you know this, but they're actually doing a co-op, like wave based kind of game mode that's completely free for everybody, and it's like a co-op thing. They're adding the ability to play multiplayer with your friends, in a single player game, and it's set in kind of like based off of like Japanese mythology. It looks pretty sick. Like it looks pretty awesome, honestly. And they're
Yeah,
like, yeah,
again,
here
the
you go.
devs care about their game. They put their heart and soul into it.
Yeah, and it's like you look at it like if a company like EA did that, they'd be like, it's $20, and each class you have to pay for.
Yeah.
It's like, okay,
Yeah, because when you imagine the developers pitching that idea to the company, they're talking to EA in a meeting saying, "Hey, we want to add this cool new game mode to our player base for free," and that the first question that EA would ask them back is, "How do we make money off of this?" But
yeah,
a lot of the times, it seems counterintuitive, but a lot of the times, money grubbing isn't the best way to make money, if that makes sense.
yeah. It's like if you have to
A lot
ask
of the
for money,
times,
that's not the best way to make money.
exactly, yeah. Because
Yeah.
it turns people away, it turns me away. I refuse to support that sort of, selfish behavior, whereas I would gladly pay, 40 or $50 for a good game instead of $20 for a shit game, you know?
Yeah, and this kind of like multiplayer, this way that they're handling it is that in itself is going to sell more games because people are going to be like, oh yeah, yeah. I mean, I like Ghost of Tsushima. I think it's a great game, but I don't really want to play it just like a strictly single player game. But
Mhm.
now they have their friends saying, hey, you should get Ghost of Tsushima. Not only does it have a fucking amazing single player campaign, but also there's a free multiplayer mode that you can play with me now. And that guy goes, no shit, I'm gonna go to Target or I'm gonna go to GameStop right now, or I'm gonna download it off the PS Store and I'm
Mhm.
gonna play it right now with you because
Yeah.
that was what was going to draw me in. And EA. I mean, we're picking at EA a lot, but like
Fuck
these
EA.
these companies that make these huge money making machines, they look at that and they just absolutely seethe because they don't get it. They
Yeah,
don't
it
get
it does
why
not compute.
they're like how do they keep getting away with it? Like
Exactly.
how do they make these free to play game modes? It's like, and I feel like to a certain extent, it's like you look at like Battlefront 2 is a very good example of like a game that kind of like, and we can get into too like these games that kind of flip themselves on their
It's a
heads.
redemption story.
Yeah, and so you look at Battlefront 2, extremely overwhelmingly negative reception when it first came out, and I was one of the suckers that bought into it because I really liked the first Battlefront. It was extremely simple and it was devoid of content, and I realized that. But I'm a Star Wars fanboy, so I really liked it, and I played it every once in a while. And then Battlefront 2 came out, and I was like, oh shit, they're just gonna make another one, and they're just gonna add a bunch of stuff, and it's gonna be awesome. There's like 6 times the amount of heroes you can play as, and it's going a little bit more back to like the true kind of classic Battlefront experience. Oh boy, was I wrong when I first loaded up that game and I tried to play it for the first time.
God,
It's
this is
like
sheer anger I remember on the internet.
it's like
Paywalls and
you go
ugh.
in, you go into the game and on release and you're like, "Oh boy, I cannot wait to play Darth Vader." And you
Mhm.
load up Darth Vader and he is a underpowered, weak piece of shit. And you look at you look at everybody else that's been playing, maybe not unreleased, but you look at you maybe you buy in a month in advance, right?
Well, there's the
And
pre-order
or
people who get their bonuses as well.
yeah, you can't look over
Pay to
that
wins.
too. You look at people who've been playing for a month, and you kind of waited a little bit, and you jump in, and you're like, oh, sweet, I want to play Darth Vader, and you get in, and you're like, okay, cool, I got the hero, I'm gonna play, and then you're kind of playing, you're like, why am I so underpowered? And you look at some dude that like runs up and one shots you, and you're like, what the heck? So you look into it, and you look into the cards and abilities, and realize that the Darth Vader you have, not only did you have to unlock him by either paying real money or grinding the game for hours, but you have to unlock all of his abilities by grinding the game for countless hours, or you can just pay like $250 and unlock the max level Darth Vader
Yeah,
right off the bat.
that's what really pissed me off. I remember reading some write up. I think it was a post on Reddit or something where some guy sat down and did the math based on average amount of points you gain per game. That if you want to unlock the entire cast of Battlefront 2, you have to play for like 200 hours or something, some egregious number. That
Yeah, just
you
to
if
unlock the
if it's
heroes.
content in a game that you paid for, you should be able to play it decently, short. Like, I do understand that there is a progression system, but 200 hours is ridiculous.
Yeah, for
It's
just to unlock, the heroes that you want to play, and the fact that there's the option to just skip the line. I want to pay, just basically straight up pay to win. Like I'm just gonna
Yep.
pay to make my version of Darth Vader more powerful than yours, and there's nothing you can do about it. And it's like, oh, you want to be more powerful? Okay, grind for 100 hours, and you'll be
Yeah,
as powerful as me, and I paid $50. But
and,
I think
it's
it was
so
literally like
frustrating. Oh, go
it was
ahead.
literally like $200, I think, to unlock like all of the skills because you had to
God.
buy the booster packs and hope that you got the Darth Vader ones or like something like that.
It's
But
it's
it's
borderline
just like
criminal.
absolutely ridiculous. Yeah,
Yeah. And it's so frustrating to me because I've only played a little bit of Battlefront 2 at some friend's house, but it's so close. It's so close to being incredible because every other part of the game is great. It looks fantastic. The sound design is amazing. The animations are great. The graphics are incredible. And those were decisions that were made by the actual developers. But the decisions that were made by the marketing people and the business majors, like you mentioned, those are the ones that really bring the game down, and it shows. It's so close, but it fails, and it's
yeah,
so frustrating. But you
and
mentioned this earlier too, and I do think that there is a big kind of paradigm shift coming because there is a lot of frustration on the developer end because they are so close to making these great games that are shot down. Because how do you think the people who worked so hard on, say, the engine of Star Wars Battlefront to think when they see all these articles about how awful of a game it is? They hate it because they put
Yeah,
hours and hours of their life into it. They work so hard to, to perfect that little bloom glint, that, that gets reflected off the stormtrooper's kind of plastic helmet. They work so hard on this stuff, and it's these fucking retards in the upper management that ruin it with their stupid decisions because they do not understand the medium. There is
yeah,
so much frustration on the developer end that it's really starting to boil over. Like you said, Bungie left Activision because I assume they were frustrated with their deadlines and being told what to do. And let's not forget that for Last of Us 2, a large part of the story was leaked in April by a disgruntled employee about 2 months before the game's release. This was an employee, we don't know who he was, but I assume he got fired if he was found out. This is
yeah,
a guy who spent the last several years of his life working on something that he was obviously very passionate about, but he was pushed to the edge by these upper management people, and he broke and he fought back. And I do
yeah,
think there is a very, very growing sort of pressure internally that is soon going to rupture, and honestly, it might be for the better because we might get a return to form of games being made by gamers. I say the word gamer even though I know it's a terrible word, but
yeah,
they're games being made by people who enjoy them. Because the marketing people and the business people do not enjoy video games. They sell them. They don't play them. There's a huge
yeah.
difference and it really shows.
Yeah, and it sucks that they're the people that have the largest voice too in the development studio. You'd think the people that are
Yeah.
actually, it's like, it's like whenever you go to a car mechanic, it's like it would be like the person that owns the building being able to tell the mechanics how to work on cars.
Exactly. Yeah,
It's
that's a
like
great analogy.
it's like when I go into a car mechanic, if the landlord came up to me and said, "Hey, your engine belt is broken," I'd be like, "Are you a mechanic?" He'd be like, "No, no, I'm just a marketer.
Yeah.
I'm just the guy that paints the walls." I'm like, "Okay, go
Yeah.
away. I want to talk to the actual mechanic. I don't care about you." The same thing. It's like going back to kind of like the Bethesda documentary I was watching. Like Todd Howard was talking about how like he used to be made fun of for playing video games, and he was like passionate about game development, and he always said like I want to be a game developer, and you
Yeah,
can
that's
kind
the
of see,
only reason he does it.
yeah, and you
Because
can
he
kind of
loves it.
say like recently he's been kind of swallowed by greed, but I've maybe Bethesda's a topic for another day because I feel like there's a lot to talk about
Yeah,
there,
it's a
but
whole case study in and of itself.
yeah,
It's a very interesting one. The
but
fall of Bethesda and
and
hopefully
one
the
of
rise in the future.
yeah, and one of the things I talked about before was like I feel like Bethesda legitimately thinks what they're doing is what people want, and then they kind of see it and they're like, "Oh shit! Like we thought you guys would like this. Okay, we're gonna scramble to get it taken care of," and
Yeah, it does
it's
come
just a
off
whole
like that.
mess.
It does
But
come off that way. I don't know enough, obviously, to give a definitive yes or no, but it does definitely seem like there is still that semblance of, spirit inside of them that they do legitimately mess up. And I'm not defending them or anything.
yeah,
I do recognize Fallout 76 was a horrible disaster, and Bethesda's made some stupid decisions recently, but
yeah,
it's really hard to say whether it comes from, greed or just, I guess, being out of touch is a way to put it.
yeah, and so like when you look at the old way, like their old mindset and the old Todd Howard and how his kind of outlook and the stuff that he was saying, he was like, we are here to make an amazing game. And you look at the developers when they go to like they go around to like the whole studio and they're talking to like the art people, the girl that's in charge of like the AI, like the horses, stuff like that. And they are having a blast explaining what they're doing. They're like, look at this. This is so cool what I'm doing, and I
Yeah.
love this. And everybody's like that. There's like a couple people that are kind of like recurring, and anybody that's listening, I highly recommend you go watch it. It's called like the Making of Oblivion documentary. It's very charming. It's like an early 2000s documentary. It's pretty good, but um, and then you see the developers are just super passionate, and Todd Howard is always there in the chair watching all of the demos, talking to the employees. He's
Yeah.
just like he's being a
It's like the
leader, and
captain
he
of a ship.
yeah, he's being a leader. And there's one part where they get who is it? They get some guy who's from like Star Trek or something to be one of the voice actors. I and
Oh, it's Patrick Stewart, of course. Yeah, for Emperor Uriel Septim. I
yeah,
remember
so
that.
yeah, so Patrick Stewart voices Euro Septic, but there's another guy who voices there's a character that's like an elf, and he's like a bad guy. He's like a dark elf. He's like a leader of like a cult, I think, or something. But he's voiced by like a very famous actor, and I can't remember what his name is off the top of my head. But
I don't know who that
the
one is, but I also know Sean Bean is in the game. He plays Martin Septum, who's a main character. That one's
yeah,
fun.
they had an amazing voice talent for that game. And you look at there's one of the voice, like one of the sound engineers or whatever, is like freaking out, fanboying because of this, because they got Patrick Stewart, because they got this other guy, I can't remember his
That's so
name.
wholesome.
And he's like freaking out, and he goes around to everybody's desk, and he's like, "You guys need to come into like whatever, like Mike's office right now, and come listen to this." And they play a, it was one of the Patrick Stewart lines. They play the line where he's like, "I have been the Emperor of Tamriel for six 50
65 years, I
years
think.
or some yeah or something," and he's like kingdoms have risen and fallen, and like it's like the super big like monologue at the beginning,
Yeah,
and they're just like they're like fangirling about it, and it's just like that would not be allowed these days. They feel like, why are you guys out of your chairs? Get back.
yeah.
We're on crunch time. You guys need to,
No fun allowed. You're having
yeah.
fun in this office? No.
Have you guys done that? Have you guys implemented the loot box mechanics yet? Like,
Yeah.
we don't have time for,
Have you built
these,
that paywall?
yeah, build
Yeah.
that paywall for me real quick. And it's just like, I feel like that is such like a good look about the way that gaming used, like the way that the development used to be. And there's probably a reason why you don't see very many documentaries like that anymore, because either A, the company doesn't want to, they don't have the time to let a camera crew in while they're trying to develop this game, and B, that the developers probably don't give a crap. Like the developers probably don't care. They don't want to be on camera. They've been working 16-hour shifts for 3 years, and they've been putting out this game where they're just dragging on. It's this soulless mess that they are pouring their heart and their entire passion into, and it's just going to come out and be this like dumpster fire. And it's like, I think that's kind of going, we have like one of our talking points is kind of like the death of passion in development studios. And another part of it is why I personally think it'll come full circle. And I think you're starting to slowly see the effects of this. And why I say it's coming full circle is, you look at like with the Last of Us League, like you mentioned, these story artists, not only in gaming but kind of in media in general. I guess like in movies, like you look at the last Airbender show that was just coming out, the live action on Netflix. The two creators of the show, like the writers, left, and it's because of creative differences. And you look at people in Blizzard that are leaving and finding other indie game companies. You're looking at these
Yeah.
amazing this amazing writer for Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines 2 like quit or got fired, and he's like the guy responsible for the first game and why it was so successful. You look at like these writers from Bungie that were leaving during the Activision era. Just like so many people are starting to realize that the industry is going in a direction they don't want, and so they are trying to speak up, and they are physically taking action. And there was strikes, or there was like work strikes at Riot for them overworking the employees. There's just
Yeah.
like so much that's happening that I feel like it's almost impossible for people to ignore the stuff that's happening nowadays. And like I feel like that honestly kind of ties hand in hand as well in like all these games getting delayed, is because they're having people either leave, or they're having too many creative disputes, or they're putting out half-assed trailers or half-assed demos. There are games that are stuck in beta forever, and they're just like we're not gonna, like they have so much backlash that they are just having to delay their games, because if they were to release it, nobody would buy it.
No. I mean, nor should
It's,
they. You should never buy a rushed game. But
yeah,
I do think it's funny though when games talk about delaying their titles due to COVID. When I do think they're probably just saying that just to have an excuse, when in reality I agree with you. I think there's a lot of internal frustration and just sort of I guess a loss of momentum, right? You spend so many years working on this game and for this company, and you just see it slowly decline and slowly die. I'd be frustrated too, and I would want to jump ship onto, I guess, an indie studio, because, in my opinion, I think indie studios and indie games are the best thing to happen to video games since it was
yeah.
made.
And you are actually kind of an indie developer as well not kind of, I mean literally an indie developer. So
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like if you were to go, like say tomorrow, so you're in like software engineering, right? Like as your career.
Yeah.
Say you chose the path to go into like game development. Um, would you have submitted your resume to like the Blizzards or the Activisions of the world, or would you have wanted to get hired by an indie studio, even if you knew that you wouldn't necessarily make you know, a six-figure salary in the future?
Um, I think I would. Yeah, it's hard to say. I have not been in that position before, but I do feel knowing myself that that is what I would want. I don't think I would be happy working for Blizzard or working for EA. Um, and obviously as an indie developer, I guess I've kind of already gotten a taste of freedom,
Yeah,
because I'm
true.
able to make decisions that I think will be beneficial to the game, and I'm able to kind of explore um unsafe territory, right? Take more risks and be a little bit more liberal with the ideas that I can apply.
Yeah, I mean,
But
you're allowed to take infinite risks because you have no boss.
I have no boss, I have no budget, and I really have no schedule. And that is not typically a very good way to structure a project. But that's part of the beauty of indie games is that they're unconstrained. They are free to do whatever they want because like myself, most of the people who do indie games start doing it as a passion project. They do it in their spare time and they build it piece by piece like a Lego set. And they don't think about budget, they don't think about the timeline, and they don't think too much about marketing. And they probably do some marketing when the time comes, but for the most part, they let their project speak for itself. And that's the beauty of it. Because wind the clock back 10 years, and the indie scene is basically nothing. I think you have Binding of Isaac that came out in 2009, and then
Holy crap.
Minecraft 1.0 came in like 2010, I think it was.
Yeah.
So back then, those are the two games that really kickstarted the whole indie scene. And
Mhm.
since then, we've gotten some fantastic titles made by just nobodies. That the Return of the Obra Dinn was just made by one guy with an idea, and so is Undertale. And I could list so many more indie titles. And if I pull up my Steam library, I think about half of them are indies that I've played and thoroughly enjoy. I mean, look at
Yeah.
Risk of Rain 1 and 2, both fantastic.
Yeah, I think Risk of
It's
Rain 2
because
is
they
a
could
perfect
go ahead.
example.
Yeah,
No, go ahead. Yeah.
absolutely.
So
It does give me hope because even though, like you said, I think it will come full circle because the passion is dying in AAA games, but that sort of frustration is fueling the fire for indie titles, and it really is just producing the best games on the market, hands down.
yeah. And you think like if you think again talking about like hope for the future of like AAA gaming and just like these companies in general, I mean, like you look at companies like EA that are already coming under and already have come under a lot of legal strife, because of gambling and
Yeah,
people. What gives me hope is what we've already talked about with like the developers leaving and developers speaking up and going where they are going to be happy rather than going where it's make them money. The fact that they are able or willing to sacrifice a huge salary in a soulless company and be unhappy and go somewhere where their passion and their talent is truly going to be recognized, I think that says a lot about not only like the state of where gaming kind of is right now, but it says a lot about where we could potentially be going in the future. And there's something I want to talk about too about the future where I'm a big Obsidian fanboy. I really like Obsidian Game Studios. I love Pillars of Eternity. I love Fallout New Vegas. It's like the only Fallout game that I actually like sat down and like played all the way through back when it first came out. Um, I love a lot of the stuff that they've done, and you look at their new game, Avowed, that they're currently working on, that was bought. They were recently acquired by Microsoft Game Studios, and I feel like Microsoft Game Studios and Microsoft in general with like Game Pass is doing something that a lot of companies are really scared to do, where they are taking these game companies not because they sell a lot of copies, because you look at Obsidian's past, Pillars of Eternity is not known to a lot of people, but the people that know about it absolutely love the games. And I think Microsoft sees that in the company. They see the fact that people love the games, and they don't see the fact that people are buying the games. And they are dumping all of their resources into them because they trust that this company that has a household name for themselves is going to make a fucking badass RPG that could rival Skyrim potentially. I mean, the curse of Obsidian is that they've never had enough money to make the games that they truly want to make. And the best example of that is Outer Worlds. Like the Outer
Hmm.
Worlds is a game that came out and people liked it, but it just lacked a lot of depth. Like there wasn't a lot of like meat there. There's a lot of potential, and they're going for that potential with making this new single player kind of story expansion that's coming out, which that in and of itself is unheard of these days. Single player story
Yeah, it's been a
content,
long
yeah,
time.
yeah, right. Like you can pretty much expect if you buy any single player game within the past 4 years. I bet you couldn't even think of on the top of your head a game that's got single player DLC that's not an MMO.
Yeah, I really
Like
can't. Or just not
like
multiplayer in general.
yeah, like just like Red Dead 2, something people have been asking for so long is please for the love of God make more story content. We want story content. We will buy the shit out of the story content. But story
Yeah.
content doesn't make billions of dollars. It's the Red Dead Online, it's the microtransactions that makes them a ton of money. So why would they dump all their resources into it? But so going back to Microsoft, um, like you look at Game Pass, you look at Xbox Game Pass, and it's like legitimately one of the most consumer friendly things on the market. Like it is literally like bringing back kind of like the experience of demoing games, which is a lost art nowadays as well.
Yeah. The art
Like
of the demo has gone by the wayside, and I think the industry is suffering for it.
yeah, and you look at like you pay like I think Game Pass PC full price is like $10 a month, so cheaper than Netflix, and you can play hundreds of games. And it's not even that there's like just like weird obscure games that nobody wants, so they just shove them on Game Pass. I mean, you can play the entire Master Chief collection. You can play all of Gears of War. You can play, like Kingdom Come Deliverance. You can play, well, not anymore. I think Kingdom Come's getting taken off. But there's like legit games on there, and you can go and they've even said like from the future, like Avowed when it comes out is going to be on Game Pass day one. So you can play the game day one, download it just like everybody else, play the game just like everybody else. And if you want to buy it full price and own it on Steam, go buy it on Steam. Go own it for full price. You don't have. There's no
Yeah.
commitment there. And
To me, this really seems like the same pattern that Netflix had back in the
yeah,
kind of late 2000s, early 2010s. In that it was extremely consumer friendly, very affordable, and offered a lot of content. But I guess what worries me is that a lot of other companies will see Microsoft, what they're doing, and they'll try and do their own version. So that's, then you get your Hulu and your Amazon Prime Video, and you'll get
yeah,
that, but game version. So you'll have an EA, you know, an EA subscription service with their titles, and then you'll have a Bethesda subscription service with their titles. That's what worries
yeah.
me about this future, but
I
I am
think
very, very interested in Microsoft Game Pass, and I would actually like to see the numbers in terms of earnings because, I mean, I assume it's worth it. Otherwise, companies wouldn't, Obsidian wouldn't agree to it if it wasn't worth their time, right? So I would like
I'm
to
gonna see
see
if I can.
the numbers at some point.
Let's see
But
here. So there's an article
it's
by The
such an interesting
Verge.
concept.
Price for $9.99 a month. So it's currently available in 41 markets worldwide. Let me see if this says how much they make. That's not really
I'm
showing
not
me
sure they'll
much.
report like the number outright, but it was just an idea I just had floating out there. But it's clearly worth the studio's times. Otherwise, I don't think it would. I don't think it would happen, and I don't think it would have lasted as long as it has because it's been going for about a year now, right? And
Game Pass
I
for
feel like
PC has been around for yeah, about a year. I think they
about a
announced it
year,
like
yeah.
E3 of last year or the year before. I can't remember,
Hmm.
but they said that
Yeah,
as
and I
of
get the
April.
suspicion that if it hadn't been sustainable by now, it would have been canned. So they must be doing something right.
Yeah, so as of April, they surpassed 10 million active subscribers to Game Pass, and that's over Xbox One and PC. So
That's very impressive.
that's quite a lot of
Yeah,
people playing.
I like that.
So I think, and so a lot of the articles are actually saying that it's not a huge profit for them right now, but it is slowly growing. And I feel like they're handling it the completely right way, where they're offering subscriptions for like $1 to start off
Yeah,
with.
like the Netflix model,
Yeah,
which
and
again, I
EA
just
has
hope doesn't
tried.
fracture.
EA has tried with their subscription. They have their EA Access thing, but nobody. I
They
think
do.
there's
That's right.
nobody plays EA games. Like the only EA games that you'd want to play are like what, like Battlefield and stuff. But the people that are going to play that already have it. So it's
Yeah.
like, and I
Exactly.
think the only other thing they offer is like a discount on the on the shop, but it's like a 10% discount. So it's like almost trivial. Um, but yeah, I feel like companies have tried this and companies are trying this, and like Apple has their like Apple Arcade, which is good for app stores. So you don't have to pay
Yeah.
money for mobile games, but and then there's like PlayStation Now, which is from my experience is pretty popular. It's kind of the same thing where it's just like the PlayStation Now is game streaming. It's not a game subscription.
Right.
So
Yeah.
you don't have to physically load the game on your drive. It's all just streamed over the cloud. But it's pretty popular. When I had a PS4 Pro, playing Red Dead Redemption, I subscribed to PS Now for a while, and I played the not Gears of War, God of War games. I played the original like God of War 3 or whatever on PlayStation Now, and it was great. Like it was
Right.
actually pretty enjoyable. But I feel like Xbox is handling this the right way, where they are not only offering people the ability to play other games that maybe they were thinking about buying, they just don't want to pay the full 60, 40, 50, or $60 for it, but also they're grabbing these game studios and grabbing these companies, and they're saying, hey, like not only will we pump a bunch of money into you to make a fucking amazing game, we're going to go pretty laissez-faire on it, and we're going to not be the super corporate overlords
The
that
Eye of
you.
Sauron. Yeah.
Yeah, we're not going to be these super, the Eye of Sauron, the perfect example. We're going to give you all this money. We want you to make the game, and we'll publish it for you. And not only will we publish it for you for full price on Steam, on I don't maybe GOG, but like pretty much every major platform, Epic,
Mhm.
But we will also day one allow people who don't want to pay full price for it. We will put it on Game Pass, and people can demo your game, and like I can say for a fact that like playing Kingdom Come Deliverance on Game Pass made me buy it for full price on Steam. So it definitely works. And so it's like it's one of these things. I just think they're going in the absolute right direction. And again, I think other companies that are these super big for-profit giant mega corporations are seeing this, like EA, Ubisoft, whatever, are seeing this and they're trying to copy it. And they're just like, why is it not working? It's because nobody wants to play your games. If you had games
Yeah,
on there
which I
that
guess
people
leads
wanted
us
to
back to
play,
square one, which is make better games.
yeah,
But I
make
also
games
think
people want to
the
play.
games as a service is incredibly beneficial to the small the indie scene too. Like you said,
Yeah,
Microsoft. It's not a very big investment, relative to Microsoft size investments, right? So it's a
yeah,
relatively small investment to make something that could potentially make a lot of money. And the great thing is because of the subscription service, the risk is mitigated somewhat because even if there's a bad game on the subscription service, it's still worth it because there are other better games. So if a game comes out and it doesn't work out, it's a flop, yada yada, it's not the end of the world. Because
yeah,
traditionally, when the games are published in a standalone type fashion, if that game fails, that investment fails as a whole. There's no redeeming it. Whereas with the subscription service, the burden is shared between all the companies that are part of this service, which I think could be very beneficial, at least for indie developers.
yeah. I think so too. And I think uh, like a really good example about of that is like whenever you talk about Risk of Rain 2, Risk of Rain 2 kind of had a games of a service model for a while where it was like, we're going to release the game in a semi complete state, and we're going to release content kind of over the years until the 1.0 release. And it did amazing throughout that entire service, and it allowed them to make a complete game in the end. I mean, it allowed them to, it was like a symbiotic relationship with developer and consumer, which is, I think,
Hmm.
kind of like what games want. They want that relationship where, the community is giving tons and tons and tons of feedback, and the developers are implementing that feedback. And I
Exactly.
and I feel like Risk of Rain took uh, a really good portion of that home with them, is because they released a fucking good game right off the bat, and people loved it and they played it. And not only did they release a good game, but it was a buy to play game. They were like, here's this game. Everything, you buy the game, that's it. You can play it as much
Yep.
as you want, do whatever you want, and it's yours. And
It's
not
the
only is
same
it yours,
story. It's the same
yes,
story with Divinity: Original Sin 2,
yeah,
in that I remember I bought that back in early access and I played through the first portion of the campaign to give you a taste of what the game is going to be like.
Yeah, I
And over
remember.
the about a year period leading up to its release, they released updates usually every about 2 weeks, listening to community feedback. And it's like you said, there's a very symbiotic relationship between developer and the player. And going back to what you said a while ago, especially with regards to like Naughty Dog making a game for themselves versus making a game for the players, it very much falls into the category of that these developers cared about the players and they made the game for them because they listened to them as an incremental process and kept making it better, and they kept building the final product to match the expectations of the player base.
Yeah,
They handled it completely right. Both these studios, Hapu and Larian, both did it
yeah.
incredibly well, and I do hope a lot of other companies can learn from what they've done and do a similar development cycle. I think it's very good.
Yeah, and I think Larian is a really good example of kind of gaining a lot of recognition because, again, it's the kind of like real time, uh, like the real time like RPG kind of side of gaming. It's a very kind of cult genre, um, and I think a lot of people love the games, and I'm definitely one of the people that have played like Pillars of Eternity and like Divinity wasn't necessarily my cup of tea for part of the reason I just don't really like turn based games. Um, but it's a good example of a company that got a lot of recognition with Wizards of the Coast. I mean, they are developing Baldur's Gate 3 because they are a reputable name that made a name for themselves for making just a
Yeah,
good game.
they proved
And
themselves.
if you look at the guy, who is the guy like the lead of Larian Studios? He's some
Sven Vinke, yeah,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Belgian man.
yeah. Yeah, so he if you look at his like live streams about him talking about Baldur's Gate 3, he is passionate from the second the
He's
video
so
starts to the
passionate.
end. He loves
Yeah,
the game and he loves his job. And
he
that's I
he
feel
loves
like
the
people
company, he loves the game, he loves his job, he loves everything about what he does, and he does it for the projects, and he does it for the players.
yeah, and
I think he's a great role model, honestly, for video gaming.
developers want to work for a company like that. They want to work for a guy that is like that. They want to work for a guy that loves what he's doing. And I feel like that's where a lot of developers are going. You know, tying it back all together is like I feel like it's going to come full circle, and a lot of these companies, especially if Cyberpunk 2077 comes out and it is legitimately if it legitimately blows the socks off of everything that's come before it, I think a lot of studios are going to have a wake up call. I think a lot of
I do think there's gonna be a make or break for the industry as a whole, depending on Cyberpunk. There's a lot riding on its release,
yeah, and it because it's legitimately in my lifetime, it is probably the most hyped game of my generation.
by far.
Like
Definitely. The amount of
Skyrim,
just not only marketing, but just people talking about it and energy surrounding it, it is just ridiculous.
yeah. Like you look at like Skyrim and you look at like I think like Fallout 4 was particularly I mean it
I
was
remember
pretty
Halo
hyped.
4 was a big one too. I
Yeah,
remember that in
Halo
high
4
school.
was really hyped. There was a lot of games but like the fact that Cyberpunk is at this level of a legend status and it's been delayed and it was revealed 7 years ago. I remember even before The Witcher 3 even was released. When The Witcher 3 was still in development, they showed a trailer for Cyberpunk 2077.
Yeah, I remember that.
And there's a song called Bullets by Archive that's in that song that I listened to for probably 2 or 3 years because I was so excited
Yeah,
for the game and it was a little tiny drop in the bucket. And then they like CD Projekt is a really good example of a company that when they delay a game, they are delaying a game to make that game the best it can be. And The Witcher 3 is the perfect example of that. They
yeah.
delayed the game. I remember because I was extremely excited for The Witcher 3. I was sitting in the cafeteria at school, in high school, and I got the notification on my phone that The Witcher 3 was delayed, and I think it was like till like April or something.
Oh
And
no.
I was losing my mind. I was like, "There's no way they delayed this game." And then it came out, and it was all worth it. And
Yeah, no,
like
it hurts at the time, but it's worth it.
and so I feel like if their track record is anything to go off of, I feel like if Cyberpunk, legitimately, like going back to what I said, if Cyberpunk comes out and it blows everybody's socks off, there is literally going to be a disturbance in the force. Like these game companies are going to shit their pants.
Yeah,
because they are all probably all laughing at the hype right now, like, oh, this game's all talk, like people are excited for it, yeah, but watch it come out and like, they delayed their game, like watch it, fail. Everybody wants
yeah,
to see
EA
it
would
fail,
love
right?
that. Those bastards.
EA would love that. Everybody would love to see Cyberpunk fail, as far as like from like a competition standpoint.
Mhm.
But I legitimately think I have hope that this game is going to absolutely rock the market.
Yeah, I hope so too. But I do also hope that it's worth it for the employees of CD Projekt Red who are currently crunching, because this is the whole basically year in AAA games leading up to release is the crunch period. And
Yeah.
it's super brutal on a lot of developers because I know I mentioned I do love Red Dead Redemption 2, but I've also heard some horror stories about how they had to work, 80, 90-hour weeks to polish the game for release. And no matter how good a game is, I don't think it's worth, you know, dragging your employees through broken glass to release it. I think it doesn't hurt to slow down a bit, and even if that means delaying the game, I'm honestly fine with the game being delayed for the well-being of the employees. And I do hope that's something that changes in the games industry, because it is notoriously hard for the developers who work tirelessly on it, the animators, the programmers. It's tough because they have to work under these brutal crunch periods to make these deadlines. And I really hope to see a change in that field, especially. And I do hope Cyberpunk or CD Projekt Red are treating their employees with respect, because they deserve it. They're very intelligent, very hardworking, and they do have this beautiful vision that I do hope they can realize.
Yeah, and and I think that's very well said. And you look at like the videos, like the development videos and the stuff about like the lead quest designer. I don't remember his name, but he comes on all the time and he talks about the game. He recently did a interview in Polish at their like kind of like their influencer building, where they bring a bunch of people in and they have them play the game for like 4 hours. It's like a
Right.
whole like kind of like a studio thing that's set up to look like it's in universe and whatever.
It's
And
awesome.
yeah, it's really cool that they even do that for influencers and stuff. But you listen to what he's saying, and you listen to kind of like the way he's talking about the game, and he is excited. Like he is absolutely excited for the game, and I feel like that's such a like we've talked about it before, just in this episode, where it's like that is such a good sign that if the guy that's talking, if you can truly believe that he is on board with what he's talking about and he's excited about what he's talking about, then you can assume that that kind of feeling, that buzz of excitement and that anticipation and that confidence that they have is
Hmm.
kind of a ripple through the whole company. And there are probably people in the company that are extremely exhausted, and especially at a time like this where the game is in the crunch period, where the game is basically complete, but they are powering through getting all the bugs fixed, getting everything, absolutely squeaky clean for release. Um, to still hear that level of like excitement, that level of confidence is very promising for the way that the game is going to turn out in the future.
That's a really good point. Yeah, I think it does show promise because, again, I have no doubt that employees at Larian, for instance, had to work longer hours than normal to make sure Divinity hit its release window.
Yeah.
Um, but despite the fact, you still have Sven Vinke, talking about, and you could just see it in the way he talks and the way he moves, that he just loves the game, even though he is pouring 80-hour work weeks into it. He still loves it. And honestly, I do have hope for the industry as a whole, because I do legitimately think that your average person at, your average programmer at EA, at Ubisoft, if they could, I think they would be a Sven Vinke or a Todd Howard, or the like you said, the man at CD Projekt Red, that if given the opportunity to make their own games and to lead the project, they would be absolutely enthralled with the idea of, making it from start to finish, and they would pour everything into it. It does give me hope.
Yeah, and I think that's a good. It's kind of a good segue into kind of like our last little topic here of kind of looking towards the future of where AAA is going, because we've talked about kind of like the death of passion, and all these developers are so demoralized and they're moving kind of to better pastures, and they're kind of trying to they're following where the passion is, and they're looking for it like a flower that's growing by a window. It's reaching for the sunlight. It doesn't want to be there. It wants to be where the sun is. And so it's like, and we've talked about like all these mechanics that these companies are putting in their games where it's like, yeah, it makes you money, but it's making people want to rip their hair out because they can't play the game unless they open up their wallet. And we've talked about kind of like the hype train, and if the hype train is kind of like people are kind of starting to catch wind of it and they're starting to be a little bit more careful and a little bit more cynical about their purchases and kind of where they're going. But if we look towards the future, like we kind of already have talked about the future a little bit with like the hope of like you look at these companies that are really making the right strides like Microsoft um, and kind of acquiring these smaller studios and giving them the means, lifting the roof off and being like, hey, go crazy, make a game that you want to make this amazing game. So I want to ask, where do you think, or what do you think the future looks like in the next maybe 5 years? Because I feel like that's a good time frame to kind of start a new era of
Yeah.
kind of like the AAA market for now. So where do you
So
think in 5 years we're going to be?
I think the future is really going to come down to two sort of divisions. There's going to be the AAA path, and there's going to be the indie path. And I do think the indie
Mm-hmm.
path will grow and flourish, and I think the indie path is going to be amazing. And it will come at the expense of the AAA path. But honestly, that I'm okay with that. I'm really not a huge fan of where AAA gaming is right now, and I do think a change is necessary. But on the AAA path, there is kind of this looming um, danger on the horizon, and we're kind of starting to see it now. And it's what I think of as the outsiders, which I think the biggest example of the outsiders is Disney, which is now you have these multimedia conglomerates that own everything about movies and TV shows, and
Yeah.
they're looking to get their hands into video games. And we've seen a couple examples here in the past few years. As you know, Disney owns Star Wars, and
Yeah.
Disney hired EA to have the Star Wars contract to make some Star Wars games for the past 5 years now.
Yeah.
And EA's kind of dropped the ball. Star Wars Battlefront 1 was, not great, not terrible from what I've
Not
heard,
great.
but Star Wars Battlefront 2
Was not
it's not
great.
great, yeah. But Star Wars Battlefront 2 just absolutely dropped the ball, especially on release. And because I do feel like the Disney tried to give them a lot of oversight, and they do not understand the landscape. And I remember we were talking about this not long ago, that you've seen this Avengers game, right? So
Yeah.
obviously that is, I think, a good example of the outsiders coming up here on the nearing horizon. Is that Disney is going to want to start making more and more games, and they will hire people who don't really know exactly what they're doing to make this happen. And as you see, the Avengers game looks bad. It shows very little promise as
Yep.
to anything more than just a cash cow. And that's part of what worries me, is that these outsiders will come in and get their hands on the video game market and try and milk it like Hollywood when games are not like Hollywood. They're trying to make games into movies, but it doesn't work. Games and movies are very different mediums. Player agency is a powerful thing and it cannot be ignored, but some companies try and brute force it anyway, and it doesn't work. So
Yeah.
I suppose that's my thoughts on the future of gaming. I don't think it's overall bleak. I think I do consider myself more of an optimist, and
Yeah.
I do think that it will regulate itself. There are obviously people who are very passionate about this particular market, and I do think those people will be the ones who steer the course into a nicer time. But I do think there are a lot of potholes that we have to avoid. For instance, not really allowing Disney to sink their claws, and obviously there are other companies other than Disney, but not allowing these outsiders like Disney to try and control it, because I think that is a very dangerous path to go down. One of which
Yeah.
that will not make good games. It'll ruin it, I think. So,
Mm-hmm.
what do you think?
So I think in the next 5 years or so, I've kind of laid a couple of hints kind of throughout about kind of where I think the gaming industry is going. Um, I think it's a little bit more optimistic, where I think a lot of these big companies are starting to pass the reins kind of to these companies that know what they're doing. And I feel like why I kind of want to say that it's going to come full circle is I feel like we've passed through an era where these giant corporations have had their fun and they've had their reign, and they're going to continue to make billions of dollars off of these soulless money clones because casual gamers are going to go in and they're going to not have a lot of time to play, so they're going to blow a bunch of money on FIFA and 2K, whatever. And that whole market, I don't think is really going anywhere. I think your Call of Duty Warzone and your Fortnite are always going to be a thing. There's always going to be something that's popular because it's very accessible and very easy to play. But for the more core, um, I guess the kind of more like experience side of gaming, where you look at like, like the story games and these big blockbuster like gaming, events of the year, right? You look at like your Skyrim and your next your next big things. I feel like those are all going to be big brothered by these big companies, but these big companies are going to slowly start to realize, like you look at who's the people that made Apex? Gosh, it's right on the tip of my tongue.
Respawn,
Yeah,
yeah,
Respawn. You look at
good
Respawn
company.
Entertainment, and you look at Apex Legends. EA probably did not think that Apex Legends was going to be as popular as it was, but Respawn fucking nailed that game. And they come from a company that makes Titanfall, and Titanfall is a cult classic. Like Titanfall is a game that a lot of people love, just not a lot of people play. And you look at Jedi Fallen Order. Jedi Fallen Order, made by Respawn as well, is out of their comfort zone a little bit, but it's also a game that was considered a pretty big success. It wasn't for a lot of people, but a lot of people generally liked it. And you look at companies like Obsidian, making these games like Fallout New Vegas is considered a pretty under the radar Fallout game to outsiders, the people that only know about 76 or whatever, but is
Mhm.
considered one of the best in the series, made by a company that not many people know about. And you look at the games coming up, like Avowed, and you look at like Baldur's Gate 3 that are coming out. Um, you look at all of these smaller companies being recognized by these giant corporations, and they're like, whenever we try to make first party games, we get nothing but backlash. So how about we find these companies that have very, very, very strong footholds in the game development scene? Let's give them infinite money and just fucking go crazy. Just make whatever you want and just make a good game, and we'll handle the rest. We'll handle the marketing part of it. You know. And I feel like that's kind of where we're going, and the trend we're kind of starting to see. And I think that the start of it starts with, legitimately, I think it starts with Microsoft buying Obsidian. Obsidian is gaining a lot of traction. And you look at again, like companies like Larian and Wizard of the Coast seeing their potential. And I feel like a lot of people, especially now, and you get into like our generation's getting a little bit older and we're getting a little bit smarter, and we're looking at the gaming industry as a whole, and we're not suckers for this shit anymore. We're not settling for just any old 2K and any old Madden cycle, and COD's getting a little bit better, but we don't want just like the next iteration of a game. We want something impactful and innovative. And I think that I dare to say the millennial generation, I feel like, is going to drive the gaming industry in that direction of putting kind of like dumping the like our money is going towards the passion games, and
It certainly is.
it's
I do hope
going.
there are more out there who think like us.
Yeah, and I feel like I feel like it's a majority. I don't think that my outlook on the future is a very wild one. I think it's definitely very reasonable, and I feel like a lot of stuff that we've talked about, I don't think those are very radical points of view. I think we're just kind of saying stuff that everybody's been saying, but it's stuff that is very real, and it's stuff that is very much happening in
Yeah,
the current gaming climate. So I feel like only time can kind of tell where things are going. And we have a lot of stuff, not really right now, but a lot of stuff coming out in the future, that is really, I mean, just like these big blockbuster games that are coming out that are legitimately, like Cyberpunk, going to either make or break the market. And I feel like um, we'll just have to see, especially come November when Cyberpunk actually drops, kind of where it goes.
yeah, I do think Cyberpunk's release will be really important for the landscape of the games industry as a whole. But in general, I mostly agree with your predictions. And you mentioned this word earlier, and I think it's a very important one. in the case of Microsoft and its little children, the Obsidian and all the other studios it's bought up, they have to trust them. I think the key word is trust.
Yeah,
Microsoft
for sure.
has shelled out some money to these people who have proven themselves in the past to make good games, and they need to sit back and let them do their thing. They have to trust them. And maybe it's hard for the bean counters at Microsoft, who I'm sure are just dying to, think of every way to squeeze every possible cent out of consumers. But it does not sell games as well as they think. And it's paradoxical, but it seems to be the way things are, that sometimes to make money, you have to not be greedy, and they have to trust them.
Yeah, I think trust is going to play a big part in it. I think a lot of the companies are starting to trust their investments a little bit, and like I said, we'll have to see where it goes and kind of see what happens in the next year or so. And I think that'll really say. And I think the next generation consoles as well are going to kind of set in stone the new standard and what people are buying. And obviously, the wallet at the end of the day is the ultimate decider. So we'll see where people put their
Yeah.
money and kind of just where it goes from there. But I think as far as what we've talked about, I think we've kind of covered a lot of good things. And um, I haven't really decided what the next episode is going to be about. I was teetering on the idea of mobile gaming, so I feel like that's kind of like something that
Oh no.
not many people are talking about. Um, Maybe there's not enough to talk about there, and that's why not many people are talking about it. Only you see the bad things, but I think for now that is probably going to wrap up this episode of the Basement Takes podcast. There is a Twitter account at the Basement YouTube or YT at the Basement YT. If you want to go give that a follow, we're going to be posting updates, new videos, retweeting articles, stuff like that. Basically, just keeping on top of everything. And in the future, I'm probably going to move to a live streaming platform. I want to kind of experiment with live streaming and doing the podcast live, either on Twitch or YouTube, and kind of just seeing where that goes, and then posting the VODs afterwards, obviously on YouTube for kind of like the more in your car experience, I guess you could say. But yeah, so for now, that is all I have. Mr. Steven, do you have any parting words for the fine ladies and gentlemen?
Um, no, not really. Thanks for having me, though, Austin. It's been real interesting.
Yeah, it's good talking to you. Thanks everybody for listening. We will catch you next week.